So let's talk about John F. Kennedy. You know the name, right? The 35th President of the United States. His time in office was tragically short, but man, it cast a long shadow over the 20th century. And honestly, we're still talking about him, still debating his legacy all these years later.
You've probably heard these words a million times. They're from his inauguration speech in 1961, and they're pretty much etched into American history. But this was so much more than just a great line. It was a challenge, a direct call to an entire generation of Americans to get involved, to serve something bigger than themselves. And it absolutely defined an era.
But here's the thing. To really get who he was, we have to look past the glamour, past the iconic speeches. There's a whole story there of resilience, of ambition, and a lot of struggle. To really understand the Kennedy presidency, you have to understand the man long before he ever set foot in the Oval Office. Okay, so let's dive into what made him. You know that picture of Kennedy, right? Young, full of energy and vigor. But that image, it was hiding a whole lot. It was masking a lifetime of really intense personal challenges. I mean, this guy was born into the Kennedy clan. Think about that. In their house, politics wasn't just a job. It was, well, it was everything. His father had huge ambitions for his oldest son, Joe Jr., to one day become president. But as we're about to see, fate had very different plans.
And here's what most people had no idea about. Behind the scenes, Kennedy was fighting this constant private war with his own body. It started when he was just a toddler with a case of scarlet fever that nearly killed him. Later, he was diagnosed with Addison's disease, a condition doctors told him might kill him within a year. And on top of all that, he had this chronic, debilitating back pain. At one point, during a spinal surgery, he came so close to death that a priest actually gave him the last rites.
And that private struggle, well, it burst onto the public stage during World War II and turned him into a national hero. His patrol boat, the PT-109, was literally sliced in half by a Japanese destroyer. His back was severely injured in the collision, but what did he do? He clenched the strap of a life jacket in his teeth and towed a badly burned crewman for hours through the dark water to an island. It was this one single act of incredible courage that defined him as a war hero. But you know what he'd say about it? He'd just crack a joke. He always downplayed it with his signature wit. And this quote, it just captures that perfectly. That sense of humor and modesty really disarmed people, and it became a huge part of his political appeal. So you take that war hero reputation, you add the powerhouse Kennedy political machine, and what do you get? A rocket ship to the top. It was the perfect launchpad for a really rapid rise to power. So after the war, a real tragedy hits the family. His older brother, Joe Jr., the one who was supposed to be president, was killed in action. Suddenly, all those family ambitions fell on JFK's shoulders. And boy, he did not waste a second. He went from the House to the Senate, and he even managed to win a Pulitzer Prize along the way. By 1960, he was ready to go for the ultimate prize. Now, it wasn't a cakewalk. Not at all. There was a lot of skepticism about his age, his experience, and a huge question back then was whether a Catholic could actually win the presidency. But he faced it head on. He famously said, "I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party candidate for president who also happens to be a Catholic." It was a genius political move. And so was picking his main rival, Lyndon Johnson, as his running mate to help win over the South. And then this happened. This was the moment that changed American politics like forever. I'm talking about the first ever televised presidential debate. Now, what's fascinating is that people listening on the radio thought Richard Nixon had won. But on TV, it was a totally different story. Kennedy looked tan, calm, composed. Nixon looked pale, sweaty, uncomfortable. Television had arrived, and with it, a new political reality where image mattered just as much as substance. So, Kennedy wins. But it's by a razor-thin margin, one of the closest elections ever. And bam, he is immediately thrown right into the fire. His entire presidency would be defined by the constant, terrifying threat of the Cold War. It was just one crisis right after another. First, there was this total disaster, the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. Then, a tense standoff over Berlin, which led to the building of the infamous Berlin Wall. And then came the crisis that brought the entire world closer to total annihilation than it has ever been, before or since. This brings us to 13 days in October of 1962. For almost 2 weeks, the entire world just held its breath.
American spy planes discovered that the Soviets were putting nuclear missile bases in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Kennedy's team secretly debated everything from a full-scale invasion to quiet diplomacy. He ultimately chose a naval blockade, he called it a quarantine, and started this incredibly high-stakes negotiation with the Soviet premier, Khrushchev, that luckily ended with the Soviets backing down. I mean, can you even imagine? That was the terrifying reality they were dealing with. Looking back, it's a masterclass in crisis management, and there's a huge lesson in there for any leader. You have to resist that pressure to react with military force right away. You have to be patient, and you have to use those private, back-channel talks to pull everyone back from the brink. But while all this is happening on the world stage, Kennedy is also being forced to confront America's deepest wound right here at home. He'd been moving kind of cautiously on civil rights at first, but events forced his hand, and he took this incredibly firm moral stand. He framed racial equality as a basic test of the nation's character and proposed some of the most sweeping civil rights legislation in history.
Look, dealing with crises is one thing, but Kennedy's presidency was also about something else. It was about looking forward, about channeling the nation's incredible energy toward these ambitious, optimistic goals. He called it his new frontier. And two programs really show you what he meant by that. First, you have the Peace Corps, which tapped into this amazing idealism of young Americans who wanted to go serve abroad. And second, you have the Apollo program, a breathtakingly bold promise to beat the Soviets in the space race by putting a man on the moon. And people really responded to that call to service. It's kind of mind-blowing when you see the numbers. Just 2 years after it started, there were already 5,000 Americans serving as Peace Corps volunteers. It just proved that his challenge at his inauguration wasn't just empty words.
And this quote, this right here is pure Kennedy. It tells you everything about his whole approach. He didn't just set a goal. He framed the insane difficulty of the challenge as the very reason we should do it. It was a call to greatness, a total appeal to the country's competitive, pioneering spirit.
You know, when you look back, maybe his most powerful legacy is found in his words. In that final year of his life, he gave a series of speeches that still have this remarkable power and vision. They still feel relevant today. Think about this. Just a few months after coming this close to nuclear war, he gives this incredible speech at American University, and in it, he calls for a strategy of peace. Right at the height of the Cold War, he's asking Americans to look at their own attitudes, to see the Soviets as human beings too, and to actually believe that peace was possible. That was a pretty radical idea for the time.
And then, just a few weeks after that, he's in West Berlin, standing right in the shadow of the wall, and he delivers this thundering declaration of solidarity. His words, Ich bin ein Berliner, they electrified the world. It was a promise to a city cut in two, and a defiant message to the entire communist world that freedom would always be defended.
But we'll never get to know the answer. His assassination in Dallas on November 22, 1963, it just cut everything short, leaving all these questions unanswered. His legacy is one of incredible achievement, for sure, but also of profound, unfinished business. And it leaves us to always wonder what could have been, what the full promise of that brief, shining moment in American history might have held.